this is my gallery, LaiSun Keane, based in Boston. I have two very special guests today. This is Charles Yuen. Is that the right pronunciation? Yuen or?
I actually don't know. In my family, it was always pronounced Yuen.
Yuen.
However, we spoke English, and
okay.
On that side of the family, it was my great grandfather that originally migrated, from China.
Yeah. So Yuen. Yeah. All right. So Charles Yuen, he's having a solo exhibition right now in the gallery. This solo exhibition is actually his first in Boston. And with me in the gallery, and the title of the show is Writing the Invisible. You can ask him afterwards why he named that way. And the show is an amazing knockout show, and I wait for you both to pass and decipher and discuss. So we also have an amazing, very famous writer poet with us. So they're going to be in conversation, talking about various topics. Of course, a lot of focus on you. So, John.
I hope all the focus is on you.
I won't waste anyone's time, so please, yeah.
Let's start with this painting right behind you.
Okay.
Because it has abstract images, scientific images, like a seascape. And take that as a boat. And also this interesting surface treaty work. You see go over these kinds of holes or something.
Trawls, basically.
Do you make them?
Actually, in this, I have two different kinds of trowels, and in this case, this one was asking contractor. They know that trowel. It's for putting down big areas of glue to do laminates with.
And when did you start working with other things besides brushes?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it has been a slow evolution. And so in the progress of the dates are a little fuzzy, but so since 1980, basically, I've been a figurative painter in some fashion or another. I started earlier as an abstract painter. And so I was doing figurative paintings, but I was getting kind of disenchanted with it. I felt sort of stuck and boxed in. And so I thought, you know what, I'm gonna take a look at abstraction again. And but being with my figurative background, my notion of abstraction was, I thought, stars, that'll be the heavens. That'll be a perfect subject matter, because my experience of stars are little white dots in the sky. And yet my concept of stars, I see moons circling Saturn, and I have a notion of what the moon looks like, and
These will be wise.
Yeah, I do get to see the sky in Hawaii, not in New York. So I thought, my concept of what is going on up there varies, is so different from my experience of it, that is a perfect space for dysfunction and misinterpretation. And that was like, yeah, that's my game there. And so my, quote, journey into abstraction was really doing outer space paintings. Planet, circle, ellipse, these are Euclidean shapes or whatever. But in the course of that, so how do you find interest? How do you push that kind of subject matter? And that's when I began expanding my painting vocabulary into way more material kind of sense.
Right.
I've since been satisfied with those paintings and have moved on, but that was sort of the beginning of that. So I was able to really reconnect with the physicality of painting through those paintings.
Right. And then also, it seems to me you also make up whole worlds. Look at that painting there with everything's in a little plastic bag, it seems, right, in a container. And it's sort of like a COVID painting without saying it's a COVID painting.
Right.
And then there's the Saturn, or Sun, Jupiter, kind of some kind of planet. And then it's all echoed by those wavy lines, right? I mean, you have a lot of different vocabularies moving into your mood or in your being.
You know,
And then they seem like saints. I mean, there's one point where I was looking at them and thinking, oh my God, I've entered a Catholic church. I knew I did, but then there's this figure upside down standing on a stance. It comes to support, and then with all that, you have to kind of read it. Like it pulls you into this room, but it's not like instantly decipherable. It's what I like it.
you know, my move into figuration came as a result of thinking that we've developed, as humans, we've developed many conventions about how we interpret things and how we identify things. One basic one in art is we accept a rectangular format.
Right.
You look at the edge of your vision, it's not rectangular. But we accept that. So I thought, why throw out centuries of development? You know, let's take advantage of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you said about that, the Catholic Church thing. The people in a bubble in a bag or whatever is a more recent motif, but it is a motif I've been struggling to get at for years. And that motif is based on a notion of painting dysfunction. Again, the interest in dysfunctionality. So it seems to me, you know, in a dysfunctional world, you are in your own universe. And
Right. Solipsism.
yeah, exactly. You know, and earlier, and way before this, but you know, trying to get at that was never successful, and somehow I was able to get at it through not thinking of it as only as dysfunctional balloon, but as other things simultaneously. So I do like to have many possible interpretations, if you will, of the things I put in my paintings. So this really, the way I was seeing it a lot was also as trees. Okay, and that was out of thinking that, you know, in the future, there may be no trees. Mm-hmm. And so as humans, we may begin to try to imitate trees to have an experience of trees. So these are people imitating trees. Yeah, it is a world I do enter into.
Yeah, you told me that. I was like, huh?
Yeah, right.
And then it occurred to me, which I've never asked you, is when you're younger, you read science fiction?
You know, I'm a more recent. No. Not that much. My best friend loves science fiction. I would try to get into it. But it was always too escapist for me. And more recently, I've gotten into science fiction because there's some new science fiction that I've been reading that is not as.
Well, that's an interesting point about your work is the difference between escapism and something that's not escapist, but makes an alternative world.
Perhaps I should mention that my dad was a scientist.
Yeah, right.
So they may have
We're saying that. He's not faith to tell us. Your father's in biology.
Yes, I'm a marine biologist, yeah.
So that's about whole worlds.
That's about whole worlds. It's about analytical approach to worlds. Also, for him especially, he was always challenging convention, which I think is also important in some areas.
Yeah, and also the self-sustaining ecosystem.
Yeah.
And all of these paintings, I think, are about something that's self-sustaining that we don't know how it's sustaining itself.
Right, yeah.
Right, I mean, there's roots, ladders, is how you might read the white things.
Yes, I definitely was going for that. route ladders, delivery systems,
So,
as well as human aspiration.
right, going down and going up.
Yeah, climbing the ladder, right?
Right, a tree,
Yeah.
people, and then this aspiration perhaps of the planet, or whatever.
That was the last thing that that was how I resolved that painting.
It changes the painting completely.
Yeah, and it made it okay.
So you kind of work it out as you're going along,
Absolutely.
but you don't leave a lot of traces of your labor. Not a lot.
Depends on where you look. So in this one, actually, there's very little what I call pentimento, which in the pentimento in my paintings is painting over mistakes. But if you look at the green one, the back blue wall, there's a ton of pentimento. And that was definitely paintings to be considered underneath there.
And that's also another painting that's like hard to read. They're not hard, elusive. Elusive, I think, is a better word than hard. I don't think you're trying to be obscure or obtuse, but there's a kind of beautiful elusiveness to it.
I really like that painting, and in part because it is slightly different from other paintings, and I was excited by that elusiveness. There was something there that was not there. Right. It was the not there was the there.
And what's the arm reaching in?
Yeah.
Where's that? What's that road of the arm in?
Well, that was the last element that went in on that painting. So.
I guess I'm focusing on last elements today.
What's underneath all that is at one point I wanted to paint these vast underground libraries. They weren't about individual books, but it was about a collective knowledge through all of history that is only semi-accessible. It's underground, beneath all of us. And, but painting thousands of books is really tedious. And it's not much fun. But I'm struggling with it.
But you have the.
I did, yeah. I put on the headphones and just went for it.
It's lots of paintings with hundreds of books. It's getting a little lost.
And this one, I don't know. It just felt claustrophobic in the end. I'm like, I don't like this painting. And it became the challenge I think many painters face is like, it ain't working. And the courage, the juncture of, well, I'm going to try and fix it. I'm going to try and make it work. So in this case, I went in with some green paint and just covered it, months of labor. But I became fascinated with having this chasm. I still wanted that subterranean components. And I was thinking, well, what am I trying to get out of this subterranean? So the chasm, then the ladders, trying to breach the chasm. And the inverted mushrooms, I get to, kind of reinstating the subterranean-ness of things. And so the arms came in really as, in a sense, it resolved the painting, but it also just reiterated that aspirational component of the ladders.
So let's talk about the mushrooms and the notion of the underground library, because both of those suggest that you're interested in the color.
Actually, I think of it as mycelial networks. It's more of a science thing. But I love how it reverberates, of course.
Right, because there is this whole now recent interest in ayahuasca.
Oh, right, that component, right, yeah.
And every time a mushroom pops up in a painting,
That's what you think of that?
I have friends who say I take ayahuasca every week to
microdose. Lick a toad every week.
We're supposed to talk about that. It's a New York thing among a certain group of people. I think both Charles and I know, but we won't say their names.
Right, yeah. But it is definitely a thing with me. Now, so mushroom motifs in my paintings are actually quite new. They really are coming out of more recent research or things that I'm reading about. discoveries of these vast mycelial networks, and it's become well known right now. But it's fascinating to me, that. And the way that these mycelial networks work as communication networks for all these different plants and trees, and so it's a interspecies, this, and I like to think of it as a kind of a metaphor for also human potential or kind of consciousness and things. However, to address maybe the more humorous component, I don't do it very often, but I am a huge fan of psychedelics. I think they have the potential of really introducing new thought and ways of looking at things. So that's where maybe more. I don't specifically take psilocybin mushrooms, but and I don't do it a lot. But I love
Speaking of psychedelics.
Oh yeah.
Because, there is a kind of altered state of seeing in your work.
I don't do many psychedelics.
No.
But as a teenager, I did. And it really changed my capacity to view things. That was a significant event, I felt, in my own consciousness development. Now, I grew up in Hawaii, and the island I grew up on is 30 by 40 miles. That's the extent of where you can go. It's beautiful. There's a ton of interest because it's a very compressed environment. You move from mountaintop cliffs to beach environments, forests. It's sort of like take the continental United States and shrink it down to 30 by 40 miles.
Well, that's, Alexander von Humboldt, when he goes to Ecuador, figures out
Right.
the weather and climate affects every level of the mountain.
Right.
And then he makes a drawing of it that becomes the basis of ecology.
But as a rambunctious teenager, it's like, wow, hey, I can go somewhere else. But it actually introduced me to a non-religious notion of the cosmos, and a kind of potential of interconnectivity, and that there are many invisible forces out there that influence us, that we can tap into.
Okay, so I believe that. But you don't refer in your work to the ways those forces have been made into conventions, like poverty, tarot,
Right.
things like that, astrology. All these kind of occult alchemy, these occult disciplines that supposedly the rational got rid of it. If you ask me.
Yeah, I don't really follow any of those things.
Right. And I wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. But I do appreciate them because it is, I think one of the themes that runs through all my work is that looking at things from different points of view.
Right.
So I may want to look at it through more scientific associations, or organic, or ecological, there's so many.
But would you say they're pretty much science-based because of your childhood?
I guess so. It's a little hard to.
Which is interesting because I don't think there are many figurative painters making out the world that come from a kind of scientific background. Maybe, but not pop up in my head.
Right.
And then, if we think of Helma F. Flint, there's a kind of big interest in the spiritual,
right,
channeling, et cetera, but I think you're coming at it from a very different place.
Very different place. I kind of reject, I love her work, but I'm not into that sort of aesthetic purity. I'm way more interested in the my interest in dysfunctionality. So way more interested in the impure.
Well, you see, every time someone says dysfunctional, we always think of her family
Right, yeah. I always think of my mom.
But I don't think I mean, the point I'm making is that your dysfunction is it's not a familial history dysfunction.
Oh, right.
Right? It's really distanced.
Yeah, and it's pretty.
a larger notion of dysfunction.
Yeah.
Because we think of, say, countries as being functional, and we think of ourselves, whether we want to admit it or not, that we're fairly functional.
Mm-hmm.
This is not true, but you're talking about dysfunction in that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. More that, yeah. I also really enjoy humor.
Oh yeah.
So, jokes on dysfunction are pretty funny.
And also that your humor's not cynical. There's a kind of cynical humor, and then there's a humor that kind of accepts the absurdity. And it's not that either. It's something else, I would suggest.
I credit when a little dips into Zen Buddhism.
Ah.
Well, it's the, if you're not going to cry, you're going to laugh.
So you have studied Zen Buddhism or something?
Not seriously,
Right.
but I really enjoyed it again as an out,
Right.
as a out from our Judeo-Christian ethics.
And then you went to Nepal.
Bhutan.
Yeah. And you looked at a lot of art.
Oh yeah,
And it inspired you.
very inspiring. Bhutan is a country that loves painters. And it's a largely anonymous practice.
Right.
People hire painters to paint big murals on the sides of their houses.
They have a strong folk art tradition.
Oh yeah, really strong. And going to Bhutan, there are monasteries that are fantastic. They're like stepping back into the 11th century. And in every monastery, there's kind of a central hall, and they're covered in murals, and you're not allowed to photograph any of them.
Interesting.
Well, one of the things that is like,
Stick the camera in.
I did not. I bit my tongue. But see, the thing is, and this is kind of terrible, there's a lot of treasures there, and what they don't want are tourists photographing these things, putting them online, and it becomes a catalog for art thieves.
Right. That is true.
Yeah, which is really terrible.
Yeah. But you spent like 3 weeks there? You spent
Oh, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, some time there. Yeah.
So it influences your art. I mean, it's not obvious influence, but one of the things that is, there's a kind of, it's like one of those words, there's a childlike wonder to you.
Ah, yes, which I
It's a
really
word,
try to maintain. Yes.
okay, because it's one of those words, when you bring it up, you just go, you know what I mean? Because it seems so many wrong ways. But there is.
Yesterday someone asked me about the influences of being Asian American.
I didn't know you were Asian.
And I thought this fairly early in starting seriously in art, which I think addresses
Not really talking about this.
where so I grew up in Hawaii, which is America. So there was always an alienating aspect of being a minority person in America. And as a youth trying to fit in, that was really, not so great. But it's occurred to me as an artist, it really gives me the potential of an advantage in that alienation allows me to look with a distance, with a different point of view, a kind of an alienated vision. I forgot the thread that I was working on there. Bhutan.
Childlike. It was a childlike thing.
Oh right, yeah. So yeah, so I've always kind of treasured that component there's a lot of sucky stuff about but I always thought that was, I always treasured that.
Yeah, it feels like you were, there's a kind of way you can say you're a victim as a minority that I think is completely absent.
Oh, right, yeah. I refused to.
Right. And also that, I mean, Hawaii is just racially one of the more interesting, complicated experiences.
Yeah, almost 2/3 of the population is Asian of some flavor.
Right.
However, not less so now, but when I was growing up, definitely the power structures were Caucasian.
Right.
And the media representation. There was no Asian.
Right. The newspaper started my interest in. Yeah, I know that.
But yes, it does help me with my childlike approach of trying to see things freshly, yeah, just kind of, that's kind of a nice thing of Buddhism, kind of a non-judgmentalness, rather than conflict is, accepting, yeah, kind of more looking for harmonies rather than.
Right, I mean, if we're all going to become trees, that's actually not an optimistic. And I wouldn't say it's an optimistic painting, but it's not a negative painting.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right?
Well, I try to address very negative things.
Right.
And maybe it's through the humor, like, in the future, humans are going to have to imitate trees. Well, that's pretty negative, but it's also kind of fun.
And also to kind of, to be able to embrace that kind of, it's also about you facing disaster.
Oh, right.
Right.
Well, back in the 80s in New York, I was a young painter, having just recently graduated, landed in the East Village, and it was an exciting time. I mean, it was energy, it was just amazing. But it also occurred to me that, people were into the urban grit, right? Life is hard, you're painting their torture. And I thought, I can do that. But that's too easy. I
As you expected.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh man, I can, just splash paint around it. My onks is not that interesting, really. So I began to work on a notion of, well, can I do post-apocalyptic paintings? What happens after? Right. And I've sort of stayed right that space.
That's true. We also work different sizes. What was that? We work on different scales.
Oh, right.
Which I think is really interesting. And within those different scales, drawing paint faces the same.
I do work at different scales, but I'm not real porous about it. So if I'm working on small paintings, I'm not working on big paintings.
Right.
Because with the small paintings, I have a real focus on developing a sense of intimacy with the work. With the big paintings, I feel like they're more public, so it's less of an oddly intimate experience, but it allows me more complexity.
I think in the last 5 to 7 years, work has just jumped to another level.
Thanks. Yeah.
And then it feels more and more complete. It's in the world we create. We don't think, something's like that. We feel like, this is what's there. Right? And then also, if you look at all the paintings, it's all done by the same person, but they're different.
Right.
It's not a style.
Yeah, I really don't want to repeat myself.
Right. It seems also kind of Buddhist in some way, right?
Well, I've always premised painting development over commercial manufacture. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a process of developing, we're got better at it. So, yeah.
It's not a corporate artist.
Right.
Very important.
So let's talk about this one, yes. This painting is called Poet's Palm, and it was based on a poem that John wrote in his latest book. It's a very short poem, and the poem just leapt out. It just struck me, and I can't quote the poem, unfortunately. Maybe. But very loosely, the poem is about someone having their palm read by a palm reader, and the palm reader telling them that the lines on your hand are lying to you. I love that sense of betrayal, as well as it's kind of a twist ending, really. It's like, oh, but it's about betrayal and self-betrayal, and a very complicated notion of self. Right? So, hey, that's a great theme. Also, you just do this big hand. So, and then, lives became these people's. Anyway.
Well, I think what you picked on is the contradiction, right? That the fortune teller is saying your hand is lying to you. You're thinking, what does that mean?
Right.
How are you going to tell?
Yeah, right, yeah. Oh no. I was really adopted.
Yeah, and I think there's contradictions in your paintings because we see the innocence, but then it's not innocent.
Right.
We see the self-create this world, but then we suddenly see. So I guess what I'm saying is one of the things that your paintings do. So in the 60s, there's this kind of dominant notion of what you see is what you see.
Mm-hmm.
Lucid the painting creating the world. And it seems to me there's another kind of looking that's about self-reflection. And then when you look at a painting, you're not only taken into the world of the painting, but you're thrown back on yourself and asked to kind of consider the painting, consider your relationship to this world, and then your own relationship to the world
I
we're in.
feel like one of my breakthroughs in that regard was actually back in the 80s, I guess, a series of reading on the French deconstructionists and so on. And so also at the time, I was noticing that a lot of contemporary painting had a very aggressive space.
Right.
It's a space that was pushing out at you.
Right.
It was wanting attention. It was, shouting at me. And at about that time, who was it? Maurice Blanchot wrote a book.
Death Sentence.
Death Sentence. And I went, that's it. That's my out. That was that in that novel, everything is just collapsing in on itself. I think Derrida, in a review of it, wrote that it was like looking at the wake of a boat, and you're in the back of the boat, watching the waves enfold in on themselves. I thought, wow, that is such a potent space that's picking up on my interest in catastrophe. That 80s, like, oh man, and post-apocalyptic, and I don't interest that. So I began to get really interested in a more metaphorically receding space.
Because the 80s is also the age of meetings.
Yeah.
It's the general policy around Reagan, right? Basically, it has institutional genocide. And
it began to cue us into these massive death events that have continued to add on our consciousness.
So does anybody have questions? He's really the smart.
Winging it.
I have a question. I have one. Yeah. That's right. For the taping. You talked a little bit about the aspirational piece, the representation of the hand movement is sort of aspirational, the ladders that are aspirational. Can you talk a little bit more about that in the context of this post-apocalyptic world? What are you aspiring to? And what does that mean to you?
Okay. Reaching out of the depths of hell to try to grasp my craft. Yeah, kind of.
pretty straightforward.
I mean, that's, well, also, that's at its most extreme.
That's your one parallel film. Just if you think about all the ladders in his paintings, they're about aspiration of failure in his case. And I think with Charles, it's not about failure, it's just about the aspiration. But there's a whole, in the 80s, there were all these artists influenced by Guston, and some of them felt like they were under his weight.
Right. I think that's still with us.
Yeah, and I feel like with your work, there's a parallel. It's not like you're under his weight, but there are certain shared things about how do we deal with what we're haunted by, not being direct about it. I mean, if you think of the piles of legs, and then I showed this to my students, and they just freaked out as I showed photos of the Holocaust with the piles of legs. I said, he never says it's the Holocaust, but he's haunted by it. How do you deal with what you're haunted by? Right? And you, growing up in Hawaii, having this father, there's things that you could say, okay, it's about the mushroom network, but you also know how fragile that system is, and how if it changes, catastrophe happens. Right?
And I also think, kind of in relation to that these influences become a part of you on a molecular basis.
Right.
It's not just psychological.
Right.
And
that's another way of looking at art, because basically we think of art psychologically and not viscerally.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of a leap.
Right.
But I also am. I really want to look at just being human in my work. Right. And accept our failures.
Right. Any other questions? Yes?
All three questions, yeah, so,
We like questions.
I think you put your hand up first, so, yeah. And then would you, we'll just pass it on.
Hi, I love your work. Thank you. I have two questions. One is, could you explain the hands, the arms, reaching out? And then the second one, did you have a response to Pluto not being a planet?
So let's, why don't you want to ask us the questions first, and then I think.
I prefer to answer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because I'll forget.
All right, sorry about this. I got confused too. All right, go ahead.
I thought Pluto was a dog. I actually didn't realize. Oh yeah, it's not a planet, right? That's all part of that dysfunctional abstraction, right? I have a notion of what Pluto looks like, and it's a gaseous ball, but maybe that's I identified with that. But the hand thing is that is also a more recent imagery kind of thing that I've been focusing on more recently, because to me this is our agency in the world. This is one, we can affect the world, and so often we use our hands in order to do that. So and then, maybe harkening back to your question, there's also something kind of futile about this reaching into nothing, right? Is it going to be successful? Is it going to fail? But to me, the important part is the reaching.
Right.
What about the head with so many hands?
That was, so I have this method that I employ occasionally, not often, but I've been doing it for years, where I will take an object or event or something, an observation, and I'll try to personalize it to the extreme. In that, so to me, that painting, what I'm painting is neurological connections. Except our neurons became hands. Whatever. I would ask myself a question like, does this chair want to be a chair? Does it want to have your weight on it? Could it rebel? And actually, I learned this technique, in a sense, from Leon Gottlieb. Yeah, so he, I had it for graduate school. Right? And I went into graduate school thinking not so Leon is a very political artist, and I went into it like politics and art, at my understanding at that time, didn't really mash too well. I thought an effective political art piece, it has no ambiguity. It's, it makes its point with clarity. To me, an effective art piece has a ton of ambiguity because it keeps the questions going. And then I looked at Leon's work and realized, he navigated it. And the way he navigated it was to internalize all these political events, digest it, and then puke it out. So it became an event of catharsis. And by introducing that personalization of that process, he was able to effectively, in art effectiveness, address politics. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant, so I trivialized it. Talk about chairs. But so that's where it kind of came from, the
Profound
neurological connections.
What a profound answer.
Yeah.
So next question?
Yeah.
I'm almost forgetting my question now because it's so interesting to just listen to you. And I am a giant fan of your paintings.
Oh, thanks so much.
And I've never seen them in person, so it's
They're better in person, right?
much.
Better than the 2-inch square.
You're good. So I think you have an ability to combine all these kinds of images that I think is really, really hard. Both the figurative, the kind of the almost dreamlike, and the patterns as well. The patterns you enjoy using, and I don't know what I'm saying, but I appreciate that so much in your paintings.
Okay.
And I was just thinking of, there was a wonderful book called The Beautiful Brain. Do you know that?
That sounds familiar.
Santiago.
Yeah.
It's illustrated, a series of illustrations from, his name was Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And they had a wonderful show of that work at MIT.
Oh.
And I'm just going to give you that name because there's so many references. He was a scientist and he studied brain, and he made incredible illustrations.
I'll have to look at
And
it.
you're gonna love it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
One of the things, just what you're saying, one of the things that interests me about Charles's work is we live in the age of collage, right? And what's really striking about these paintings is even though you're drawing from disparate sources, you don't feel like it's a collage.
Exactly.
You feel like it becomes transformed into the painting, into the diversity of that place.
Yeah, therefore that whole world
Right.
component rather than a fractured.
Right.
And then the whole world is not this, the difference, say, between, this is gonna sound radical. All right, let's see.
Go ahead. You've never shied away, John.
The difference between Charles, say, and Guston is Guston's world is pretty much the same world. The room, the landscape, that he has a few worlds that he goes back to. I don't feel that in his work, in your work. I feel like it's really like a different world. And then this world is not that world there. It's not that world there. And then that's particularly true in your large paintings. That you really push them into this place. You just go, oh, okay.
Yeah, with the large paintings, I love painting big, right? And with the large paintings, I feel like I do have the opportunity to actually have multiple worlds and the complexity. And
But then that becomes like your alphabet. Like
yeah. And it's a little porous, Maybe I'll work on a little painting and go, oh, that's a cool motif.
Right.
I'll use that as a basis.
Right.
For another painting.
Right, because she's that dragonfly person.
Right.
I first saw that in a small painting. It's sort of a big painting. And it vibrated.
Yeah, there's a lot of, well, over the many, many years, I've sort of, my paintings changed, but I feel like the change is rather slow. And, but it's also been a journey of developing a vocabulary.
Right.
And
That I feel very strong.
these characters that emerge,
Right.
re-emerge in a different form, different meaning.
Right.
Yeah. So actually, back in the 80s, I landed on a motif that I fell in love with, and it was based on smoke. Now, as a painter, smoke was attractive because you can see through it, but it also has ramifications of disaster, and so I just loved it. And it was an inverted teardrop with lines so we can see through it. Yeah. But it's still with me, but that's kind of coming from that. Or the painting on the left and the back, the big blobby thing, that's kind of third generation smoke cloud.
What that's saying is that you have a vocabulary that has a kind of elasticity and an ability to become something else.
Well, I'm able to discover new things.
Right.
My best painting time is when I wake up.
Oh, yeah.
In the process of waking up.
Yeah.
That's my most productive painting time.
So you paint like right early in the morning.
I didn't say when.
Well, so I can remember things. No, it's not unusual for me to start painting 10 midnight around there. And, midnight, yeah, 2. And then, the sun's coming up. Oh, no. But I think, and this has just been consistent over the years, and I think nighttime is when the ghosts come out. That's when our definitions of things begin to loosen, and that really helps my process. Because I'm not a painter that pre-plans. I very intentionally underplan, because then I can let the metaphors of the ghosts emerge and help me under these paintings.
Is it why is the title rhyming the invisible? Yeah, because the spirit in the air, right? The vibration.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's affecting how you feel about.
Yeah, I was thinking about the invisible forces that affect us, and then I thought, hey, I can rhyme with it. No one knows what it sounds like, so we don't know if it's rhyming or not.
So we have enough time for the last question. Do you still want to ask?
So my question was kind of answered in that it was about your actual process.
Oh, yes.
And you've just answered it, but as deliberate as your figures, your objects look in, especially the larger paintings, I was going to ask how conscious, how did you come to them? Was it pre-planned or not? Like when you articulate, when you describe the work as we go through it, you're very clear about the meaning or the the implied, but were you conscious of it while you were creating it? I guess that's my question.
My answer will be the most irritating one, which is yes and no. So it is a process of discovery. And I do have a bag of language or a bag of
Tricks.
Yeah, that
Every artist says that the poet has a bag of tricks, and it's what do you do with them?
Your library.
yes,
How do you add to them? How do you expand it? But we do have a bag of tricks.
exactly. So
Yeah.
for instance, there's in my figuration, my painting of people, there's different varieties, and I will have different intentions for them. So for instance, the people in that large painting in the back, I have one intention for, which is very different than say, in the little painting in the back right-hand side, there's a character there with no arms.
Yeah.
So both those iterations comport with my intentions. Now, why do I intend these different things? So the person, the no-arm person, that's from a group in my mind's eye. These are the mud people. These are deliberately underformed, but they're mud, and so I hope to address a kind of a human empathy through that. I didn't really, on the back, that other one, that was about people reaching to the clouds and so on. I didn't really want mud people for that. I wanted more definition. But a lot of it's very flexible, so my intention also responds to what I'm getting.
And so John Walker, I had a conversation with him yesterday, and he talks about when you talk to the painting, you want the painting to talk back to you.
Oh yeah.
And then that's really what happens in the process of painting, is when the painting's talking back to you, something's happening.
Yeah.
You want to treat the painting as an equal to you. That's
Yeah.
really what's going on.
Yeah. A number of my friends say that, my artist friends, like, I have so much fun in the studio. And I'm like, yeah, that's not me.
So it's all interesting. It's not you, but it's not like you make the labor, whatever you go through, the subject matter. Right? So it's
Right, yeah.
You don't even chase. I remember going to an art event in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the woman had made a quilt, and she kept telling the people who were looking at it, it took me, 4,000 hours. I was like, yeah, what a waste of time. They did not like me. They didn't like me.
Well, so like, why go to the studio? You're not having fun. But I do find it incredibly rewarding when something works out. But yeah, in the studio, I'm looking at my shortcomings, looking at my failures. It's a very more existential space, and it's not fun.
No, it's a self-investigation.
Right.
And you're always bumping up against what can I do, can I do it?
Right. Yeah. And it's a favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's when we are entering into conversation at that point.
Right.
Okay, we are almost to lots of the hour mark. What do you think? Should we, do you want to continue off camera? Privately?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah, we're kind of like talkative people up here.
I think a lot of people still want to talk to you and yeah, but we can do this, afterwards.
Sure.
Right?
Thank you.
Thank you.